Welcome, everybody, and I think it's absolutely lovely to see you all here. Those of you who've braved the weather in person, and those of you who are always going to be online, and a few extra online than in person, who wanted to stay in the cosy comfort of your meeting rooms or homes. I understand this is most unlike Perth, and we haven't yet learned how to cope for this season, but we will. Obviously, we're meeting today on Wajak Numabuja, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you for joining us for this Audit Committee Forum. I'm sorry, I think last time I had COVID, I was struck with the COVIDs and couldn't join you for the November one, but I thank the team for carrying that one and for your continuing interest in coming together to learn how we can best serve the public entities through the Audit Committee. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Peter Wilson to you as our guest speaker today. So those of you who don't know Peter, as well as chairing our Audit Committee, Peter also holds, and DPC's Audit Committee, Peter also holds a number of non-executive positions, director and chair roles across Australia, in government, private and not-for-profit sector. So he's currently the chair of Power and Water in the Northern Territory. He's also, as well as Alcohol and Drug Foundation, Australian Retail Credit Association and the Australian Network on Disability. Peter, you have held some absolutely fascinating roles throughout your career. The chair and president of the CPA board is where we first met, and outstanding leadership through that organisation's governance crisis. And those of you who are either members of CPA or CANS or just avid readers of the Financial Review will realise some of the challenges that Peter steered the new board through, as well as the barbs and things that he had to go through, and just the measure of the man, the values, the resilience and the expertise in good governance was just something that was incredibly impressive and a great privilege for me to witness and work at the board table with. Peter's also worked in Victorian and Australian Treasuries, also held group executive roles with ANZ, Amcor, and I think one of those stories is coming out today, and been CEO of Energy 21. So, look, today the reason why I'm so excited about Peter talking with you today is because, he brings not just that board and committee chair roles and experience as a CEO, but he also, has this great sense of how can we do better, and that ability to not just see things as they are, but also what they could be, and then bringing people with him, and, the clarity of thought and communication and resilience to do that. So, we're going to hear from Peter. There's going to be a question and answer session after Peter's presentation. Then I'll give you an update on OAG-related matters and some things you may find interesting. And obviously then there's some questions, some time for questions that you can ask me anything you want on anything that as OAG we may be doing well or you think we could do better. And obviously then I'll invite you for some refreshments outside. So look, thanks once again for joining us. And Peter, let me hand over to you.
Well, thank you, Carolyn, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here, and I hope we have some fun together in the next little while. So my presentation is interesting. It's talking about the sale of sand to the Arabs, because I'm talking about the audit chair role, but you all are. So what I thought I would do is not spend too much time on what you already know, because that's not really what I wanted to talk about, although you've got to understand the what of the role. But I wanted to talk more about the why, where and how, some of the issues that come up in being an audit chair, and templates that I've seen applied successfully and unsuccessfully, and experiences of others, because I think that's what we're really here for, the value of networking and understanding what has happened in other places. So to start with, I think it's a role that's formally very easy to define, but much harder to apply successfully in practice. And I'll talk about some of the reasons for that. And I don't think what I regard as, or I've come to know, the premium skill mix is in the PD. There's some extra things I think that makes a good audit chair. And I want to talk a bit about the context, because what we do is we have people coming into a room with us and we want them to leave inspired to do what we think is necessary or essential. And to illustrate that, I'll cover a train wreck, which I had the difficulty, but also the great lesson of working through, but also a near miss with a colleague that I interviewed, where in both cases the Audit and Risk Committee were critical in pinpointing or solving a major problem. So in terms of the what, getting the right compass and gear, if you want to find out what an audit committee does, what a chair does, there's plenty of places to find it. You only have to Google and you go to the ASIC website, the company directors, OAG and WA, CPA, the two accounting bodies, and you'll find out what they do, and you'll find that there are great... I'm just going to tilt over and fall, so I'm just... There we go. You'll find out what they do, and you'll find all the skills are there: accounting, finance, risk, professional quals and independence. But that's okay. They're necessary conditions. They're not sufficient for success. So I think one of the things that we all have to do in being appointed an independent chair is to define yourself early on. But assume that the parties that are working with you have already researched you, and that's easy to do these days. So you're walking into the room initially as a stranger, by and large, and how do you define yourself? It's very important for early credibility. Yep. No forward motion here. Oh, sorry. Ooh, there we go. Came in a rush. So avoid what I call images unbecoming, and we can see them here, starting at the top. Some people appear looking a bit like an astronaut, which is, there's human form involved, but you don't quite know where this person is from, or whether they're going to or on the way from a foreign planet. And then bottom left, we have the hectoring mother, which one can hope she'll get the message through to her daughter, but that probably won't happen. There's Caesar that lays down the basic law. And a bit better than all of those is the parental tribunal. But again, do you get the empathy or the buy-in to what is going to go on or what you'd like to have go on during your time? They're probably not, but they are practiced amongst audit chairs that I've known. I think the trick is to show the better yourself. Remember, you're there really on a 2+2 contract. 2 years plus an option of 2 generally, can be varied. So that's not a lot of time to make an impact, particularly with an ongoing organisation and an executive that might have, in some cases, a decade and a half on average in the role. So one of the key things I think you have to do is to be an 80-20 listener talker, not the reverse. And some audit chairs come in being the reverse, which is a great turn-off. But to show a more positive side, that you're an earnest, positive, reflective, inclusive individual that leads by example and encouragement, not fiat, and certainly not fiat by email. And I think one of the real values or success factors for an audit chair is to ask powerful questions, even if you think you know the answers. That will stimulate the others around you to think about, A, what value you have, but also the fact that by asking a question, you're wanting to get the transfer of thought to the others in the room, particularly those members of the corporate executive. So I think really we all have to have responsibility for moving the agenda to set clear objectives and milestones. And I think engagement, getting buy-in is the real success for that. I've seen some audit chairs use email lightning bolts or zinger flingers. It's not successful. It might work in politics, but it won't work in terms of the buy-in you need and the very peculiar role of an Audit and Risk Committee. And I think acknowledging came from the meeting with Carolyn's Audit Committee today. There was some successes along the way. Acknowledging people for their successes or the things that they've done positively is a great and important part of the job. So the premium skill mix that I talked about at the beginning actually goes into the field of psychology, the role you have as a mentor, as the chair of the Audit Committee, and also rationalising, curating what you see into a value-added explanation which helps the people that you're working with. So I'll give you an example. I wrote a book which is shown there in the bottom left corner, Make Mentoring Work, which I had probably the most fun I've had for a large period of time. I interviewed 100 leading Australians and international leaders, former Prime Ministers Hawke, Howard, and Michael Jeffrey, who many Western Australians here today will recognise, who was Governor General after Peter Hollingsworth had to step down. But interestingly, he was former SAS commander, both commander of the regiment here in Swanbourne, but also in the field in Vietnam and Malaya. And I asked him about his own leadership style, and he told the story that he had many mentors, but there was one in particular who was a momentary mentor, what he called a momentary mentor. So how that happened is he was up for an award. I did check, it was a military cross, and he was in London and he got it at Buckingham Palace. And picture this, in the main room in Buckingham Palace, there was a long sort of snake line up to the Queen, which he thought to be in alphabetical order, but he was right at the end, deliberately so, he found out. And he worked his way forward to get his award, and from the late Queen Elizabeth, and she gave him his military cross and then said, "Have you got some time for a cup of tea?" Now, I think even the most ardent Republican would say yes to that out of fascination, but he wasn't troubled by that being that person. But he did of course accept the invitation, and he said, "What I realised she wanted to know was about my experiences. It wasn't that she was a queen or that I was a commander in the field. She was a mother." And so we went off and we had a cup of tea, and she wanted to know, in leading men in the theatre of war, how I felt as a leader. At that stage he was a captain. How his men felt, how the feelings were at home about what was happening with these people, and how they relayed that. And he said it was very clear she just wanted to learn from me on what I had gone through, because she said, "I've got sons, probably have grandsons of my own that will go through that exact experience." And he said after that, it completely changed my mind on leadership and leadership of groups. He said after that, after we'd done the saluting thing, I tried to remember people by first person name, whether they're the cook, the orderly, the lieutenant that ran the squad, whatever. I tried to relate to them personally in a way, remember something about them, and I used to take notes just so that I could get a bit of an update on how they were, how things were going. And he changed his leadership style, and he said, look, it had obviously a dramatic impact on what opportunities I had. And I think that's a really powerful example of what indeed we have as chairs of audit committees. We come in essentially as a stranger into a group of people that know each other well, and in getting our credibility, we have to show the human side, the less authoritative side, to get engagement, because we are most successful when people that come to an audit committee we hear are coming because they want to get there. It's something they want to do, and they go away feeling inspired about what they should do to help the organisation and its governance. Too far. So, again, a bit of a boilerplate one. In terms of starting in the role in the audit committee chair, you've got to do your due diligence, and in terms of that, I think we all look for who's the contact person, who in this organisation is going to make things happen, and then you get the basics: the audit charter, the past audit packs and minutes, and the like. You check what the external auditor is saying about the organisation. How clean are the opinions? What's on the website about what's going on, and what sort of stakeholder feedback? Talking to others about this organisation, and what do I know of the pluses and minuses, and then meeting the internal auditor, meeting the CEO, who's on the audit committee, and then what I call probing the governance context, the "where are we now" question, which is very important for audit chairs to know where we are now. And when Carolyn asked me to speak, I thought, how do I conceptualise that? And there probably are three ways of looking at where an audit committee stands when you arrive. What I call the classical waterfall, the muddled scramble, or somewhere in between. So let's look at what each of those look like. So the cascading waterfall to me is the metaphor of a dream organisation as an audit chair. Because you look at a waterfall like that in cascades and they speak. So you should be able to see an equivalent in the organisation. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, you'll be able to see this organisation has a clear strategy, it's got a clear mission, and it's got statutory purpose. And I can see that. I can see what that is. And particularly the first, I can see a strategy enabling what Parliament wants for this group. And then as you look down, you hope you can find a comprehensive strategic risk framework, operating risk, KPIs, links to compliance, controls, it's all there. And that as you're dealing with a CEO and an executive leadership team that are bought into that. And you do have to find ways when you're doing the job of identifying all those things and getting the buy-in. Because remember, your reputation and risk is part of this for a short time. So you need to know the stability and the integration of what you'd expect to find. In the two experiences I have at the moment, that is exactly what I find, but it's not always the case. And from your own perspective, when you're on the AIC, you hope to find an external audit plan, a good relationship with the Office of the OAG that's executed well, an internal audit plan that meets all the main compliance obligations, manages its content against the strategic and operating risks, and that actions are completed on time and not in a perpetual slip mode. And there's execution through responsible management, not alternates from corporate. In other words, there's real buy-in, practical buy-in. And that your KPIs in the Audit and Risk Committee are met in the same beat as those for the organisation. Then there's the muddled scramble. Now you see this gentleman or lady, that's your Audit and Risk Chair. He's engaged in a journey on the same river system, but the waterfall is nowhere evident, not visible, and he's off to a day at work at the Audit and Risk Committee, and that's what's ahead of him or her. So, what is that? And I think we've probably experienced it if you have any career as being an Audit and Risk Chair. Not much strategy, an eclectic framework at best, strategic or risks, and an ad hoc set of controls, some of which are so old, you'd think that they're invented by one of your school teachers. And that the external audit process is the high peak of the annual scramble. Perhaps you don't know this experience, Carolyn, but it usually shows, and the external auditor will know, oh dear, I've got to go back there and do some work again. What am I going to face? And the internal audit program is usually a bit of a composite created by the consultant and put together with further traces from the corporate Ouija board and perhaps a little bit of what's going on elsewhere, a bit of a higgledy-piggledy combination. It's a terrible place to be, frankly. And after each audit committee, you survive, but the experiences might not be repeated or repeatable. In fact, in this case, we've got the audit chair emerging with somebody that knows what's going on, and you hope that's of value, but that's not the place you really want to be. So particularly thinking about COVID, and this was a real challenge for most of us, I think, it's somewhere in the middle. The reality is somewhere in the middle. That often you find you're starting a role, particularly after a traumatic experience like that, where there are disconnects between what should have been done and what has actually been done because of what we've all been through. And so there you're coming in very quickly for a bit of damage control to focus on closing out the outstanding actions that are critical, cyber, workplace risks, safety and the like, finding some low-hanging fruit because management around you and you will want some signs of quick credibility. So you might do things that show you can get the job done, even if there isn't the normal order of things. that you'll probably be involved in the meetings as much in workshops as an orthodox program to work out and to get a consensus about where the gaps are and to catch up. You can use the OAG Audit Practice Guide. There's some good hints there, but you really are making it up as you go along because you have to. That's just the reality of where you are. And now for the hard bit, the Audit and Risk Chair. Your job really is to test the impact and efficacy of the other Audit and Risk Committee members. And what you want to do, particularly if you're anywhere near the whitewater end of the river system, you want to push the work back uphill so you can see that cascade waterfall, you can see those pieces connected together. And it's clearly as much a challenge in diplomacy as it is in audit practice to try and encourage those with you to fill in the gaps, which means from time to time you'll have to go back to the CEO to seek their support, say, look, there's some things missing here, that's a problem for you, I think it's a problem for me. You might need some CEO support for regime change. I find in the relationships with the CEOs, they generally see you as an independent source of advice, safe haven, not wanting to get in there and do the job, but to point to things that they need to know that perhaps nobody else is going to tell them. And that relates to perhaps changing the mix of groups. Initially, you're responsible for who's in the Audit and Risk Committee. So if you see who's there as not being right for the job, you might make a suggestion that you'd like the mix of the Audit and Risk Committee changed to be more effective. That in a way is the easier job. But in the discussions that you get to with the CEO, it will probably show up some issues about people that are on the executive and it may need to be changed. And ultimately, if you're not satisfied with the progress and the relationship that's forming with your time, you have to think about your own position. If you're really not comfortable with the people around the audit function and the movement towards a rational system, you should think about voting with your feet and leaving. So, a train wreck on my journey. When I was at Amcor, I was the secretary of both the HR and Remuneration Committee of the board and also the Audit Committee. And in doing some work for the Audit Chair of Amcor, I quote that here, but I found some anomalies. Both there are people in the corrugated box division that their salaries had gone up in a short time by 150%. There were some asset sales of really good corrugated box gear that had seemed to go off to parties that there's some sense from corporate checks might have been related parties to people in that box business. And so I raised these anomalies with the chair of the Audit Committee, very distinguished chair, Jeff Tomlinson, chaired AXA and had a number of other roles from WA originally before he moved to the East Coast to pursue that career. And I recommended a forensic accounting and IT audit, which he agreed to readily on the evidence, but that led to uncovering that 5 people in the 22,000 people of Amcor had constructed a cartel. And they enlisted the 6th person to that group, which was the group CEO on the left, Russell Jones, who was ranked probably one of the 2 or 3 most respected CEOs in the country at that time. And he, the thing I found out about cartels is that very little is written down. Ultimately, they are theft. It is a form of thief, of larceny, that you're stealing money from the customers by keeping the prices high. And after this particular case, Peter Costello changed the ACC law so it made it a criminal offence, being involved in a cartel. Before that, it was a civil offence. So basically, Russell Jones had a meeting with Richard Pratt, you probably will recognise, the former principal of Visy, now deceased. And they didn't agree customers on the back of an envelope. They agreed to customers on the back of a paper napkin, that you find in pubs. Drew a line down the middle, A for Amcor, V for Visy, and they wrote down which ones they would look after. So that all came out, and ultimately the board, there was a midnight board meeting at the offices of Allen's, which I attended, and the CEO was marched up to that and sacked on the spot. Cancelled all his options and shares, which were $25 million in the money, and he was shown the door. And we were given, by being the first mover to the ACCC, we were given provisional immunity from prosecution, which means you are project manager to, effectively, it was Graham Samuel, the chair of the ACCC, getting all the material about the cartel to them to make the case, and then they confirm the immunity. So that sort of affected the organisation for about a year. And ultimately, I think Visy was fined 300 million, Pratt was fined 32 million, and provisional immunity doesn't excuse you from the class action that you inevitably face, and both companies had to settle for hundreds of millions with their customers who they ripped off. So it's a terrible thing to go through, but it shows that sometimes the signs, the things that intrigue you as an audit committee member or chair, you just have to go further. You just have to find out more about it. And that desire to inquire further is obviously a great asset in being in this role. So a near miss, Fiona Wood, a great ambassador, great Australian here, the head of the burns unit at the Royal Perth Hospital. I did interview her as part of the book and it was great. Went into the Royal Perth Hospital burns unit and it was very much on a sort of a post-Victorian, very heavily walled burns unit, very small, no flexibility in the the petitions in terms of how you treat patients. And there were probably about 12 to 15 beds in what was the burns unit about that time and since. And so two things happened for her, which again brings one to the feet of our great audit committee process. She said to me, I remember this, our biggest fear is the death of a patient and how as a group we have to share in the learnings, however painful, and mentor the supervising surgeon who'll be grieving too. So you forget this or perhaps aren't conscious of it. In those institutions, the people dealing with life and death in our hospitals, when someone that they get close to dies, they grieve too. So the families have to grieve, but the providers of that service. But two things happened. She said one day our board committee stated, how would we cope with the arrival of a large number of burns victims? The audit committee, in doing their scenario testing, raised that question. And soon after, Woodside arrived and said, look, we've done our scenario testing and we were not sure how we would cope if there was a large number of people we had to transfer from a massive explosion on an offshore oil and gas platform. Exactly the sort of thing that you expect coming out of strategic risk mapping. And so she said, look, they're really good questions. We're concerned about them too. So they went into some planning of how would they move from a 12 to 15 bed area in the burns unit into the rest of the Royal Perth Hospital. How could they move the space around to accommodate a larger number of burns victims? And then this happened. Anybody know what that is? Yeah, Bali. And of course, nearly 100 people with burns were shipped in primarily to the Royal Perth Hospital, to the burns unit. So they had to put that strategic planning exercising into operation. And that's one of the survivors that she enjoyed showing me the picture of. And then, of course, those practices were very important, not just for migrating a small burns unit into the rest of the hospital, but for COVID. My daughter is a paediatrician at the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and the same thing happened at COVID. When that broke out, all of the small paediatric units in the hospitals around Melbourne had to migrate to the Children's Hospital, so they had to expand space or accommodate that so that the space in the other health centres, hospitals, was opened up for COVID victims. A very important principle. Not sure exactly when it started, but certainly the practices that were developed by Fiona and her people were critical in that. So to summarise, as an audit chair, think about your leadership brand very carefully, and I think put to the foremost the trust and the confidence that you have to build in others around you, and think about where you are and where compared to where you hoped you might have been. That reality check is very important. And work out how you're going to build credibility and pathways back to the dream waterfall. And never underestimate the power of continuous positive feedback, because the critical success factor, I think, to your job isn't just your own skill. It's the enthusiasm with which people come to your meeting each time and how they go out feeling they want to do more. So that committed engagement I've always found to be very important. So thank you very much. Questions? Yeah.
Questions. So, questions for Peter, particularly around how you handle those hard calls or hard pieces of advice.
Yeah.
This is where I'd like you to go, unless there's anything more burning from the floor immediately.
Well, it's. I mean, we all need a safe haven. So you have to be clear on what you're seeing and what you do, but it also means you know you're doing something which is probably going to break a relationship if it's in harm's way. You know, if it's something that really isn't right. You have to think the confidence that I have in being able to do that and my sense of duty to that job means I have to put that at risk. In the case of Amcor, I had a very good professional relationship with my CEO. It was widely regarded. He regarded me as, you know, a good professional colleague, and I thought probably a friend I would keep into later life. And I know from talking with others at the company, many of whom are retired, he still brings me up as a problem, and he's not spoken to me since all that broke. And that night I saw him when he was sacked. So that hurt in the sense I thought he was extremely silly. He had the opportunity as a CEO to say, stop it. It stops now, and, you know, pull it apart, but he sanctioned it. And then he went and saw his counterpart at Visi. So despite what I thought of him, the fact that he did that, he had to bear a consequence along with the whole organisation. And I mean, it was like being chair of Yarra Valley Water during the drought. People did not want to identify being from a water utility during a drought in Victoria. People didn't want to identify being from the packaging industry during all the press going on around Amcor. And people didn't want to identify, as you know, Carolyn, being from CPA Australia when we had a CEO that had retired with, been retrenched with 3 years severance and $4.5 million after he was paid twice what the market benchmark said he should have been paid. Massive shock to anybody reading that news, and it intimidates you because you know you're going to have to be with it. But I think the thing you think about is, I can see where this is going. I just have to take the next progressive step that makes sense, and just encourage yourself to keep going till it ends. And all those things surely do. They all end. You just have to continue the journey until they do, however painful. Yeah. Yep.
Sorry, can I just give you the mic so out online?
Peter, David White from the Shire of Beverley.
David? Being
a Band 4 Shire, we don't have the necessary requisite skills on the committee, on the council that we need. My background is in as a CPA member, finding myself as chair of the audit committee, leading a group who, and with respect to them, they're wonderful people, but they really have no financial experience at all. And you find yourself carrying the whole load. What would you recommend in terms of trying to educate and bring those people up to a standard where they can grasp the nettle of what an audit and an audit committee is all about?
Yeah. Probably three ways, and I'm afraid they're very intensively applied on you as chair. If you have the skills and they don't, and I chair OAG here, and so I've got an organisation of accounting and audit specialists, so there's no issue there. In Premiers, I have policy advisors, economics, administration. I don't have many accountants, and in your case, probably even further away. So I think the job, part of your due diligence going in is to work out, in terms of the template of what a good audit committee does, what do they know and where are the gaps? And then initially I found myself in similar situations to you doing some mentoring offline, which can be quite time intensive with the people that critically matter, or identifying the gaps and getting someone else, a colleague of mine, a visiting speaker, to come in and talk about that, where they're hearing a voice different to yours and mine in that role, which, you know, they can get a bit sick of. So, and I've certainly relied strongly on peers in the audit committee role to come in and help me where I've needed that sort of build-up of skill deficiencies, because you've still got very intelligent people that you work with that have built their careers either with professional learning or, you know, with studied practice and experience. They speak for themselves that they've got there in rational development of a person, a career. So you have to form that. Like I was doing it this morning actually in another place. There was we had an issue around cash management and term deposits and how you manage to maximise fees. So I had to take someone who was an engineer, who, like you and me, got superannuation money to look after, and say, you break your expenditure down when you really need money, like paying a tax bill, and separate to that, you try and structure your cash holdings so that you're maximising the revenue, and you could see the lights come in their eyes. So a lot of the work we do isn't a mystique. It can be broken down into some simple propositions that help. But some of them that you're working with might need a course or something to do offline to help them with and there are plenty of those around. So I think the solution's probably in there. But, you know, I feel for you. It makes it heavy going sometimes when you feel like it does come down to you. As long as that's not risking you and your reputation because of what's going on, where there's a different solution. I just can't help you. I think I need to go. So.
Peter, thank you for that talk. It was beautiful. Thank you for sharing with us. I had a question on external evaluations or external independent evaluations of audit committees. Have you ever initiated one in your long history or long career? And if yes, what was the value you got out of something like that?
Yeah, usually, and I've been lucky, I've worked in organisations that are resourced to help, but usually annual, sometimes biannual. And there are plenty of people out doing that, as well as the board reviewers. You've got board audit committee specialist reviewers. So usually, in 1 or 2 years, we either do it ourselves, and you know we've constructed an online questionnaire that's anonymous, which you know we've put out amongst ourselves, and people have responded anonymously. So. Those results always come in, and you know you expect the chair's going to get a bit of a kick here and there, but that's all right. You know, we're all strong people, but usually not. There's usually, and I think the real value has been you've got a question of the various components of the audit role. You know, from strongly dislike or disagree with how we're doing it to agree with what we're doing. But the thing I found really powerful is that if you put a little box at the end of the questionnaire that says, name 2 or 3 things that you think this group does very well, and name 2 or 3 things that you think this organisation, this committee should improve on. And the combination of the last box in particular is very powerful. You'll either get a confluence of themes that you have to work on, and people feel comfortable to do that because you know, they're not in the spotlight and they've been told about anonymity, so they say what they think could improve. And you get to share that with the board or with the board committee and then do some things about those suggestions. So I found that a very successful way to lift the platform of what you're doing and how you go about it. And but yeah, it depends. Big issue of credibility there because you need to do what you say you're going to do. So if you say you're going to act on those, then you've got to have some program of work or do something that validates that. Otherwise, you'll start to lose the confidence of the committee members in you. But that's really powerful. And you get others that do that professionally. So we normally alternate an internal review that we run that's anonymous for the respondents, and then someone that comes in with their own questionnaire and interviews each of the committee members directly. But it doesn't. The first isn't hard, but it's always been very valuable. Yeah. Yep, up the back.
This is a question from online. I'm a new audit committee chair at a WA local government. How does the committee do its job while keeping the CEO and officers on side?
With care, with considerable care. I mean, hopefully there's a few tips in my presentation, which I'm happy for you to circulate, Carolyn. But I think, yes, think carefully about the job and make sure that the program that you've got is known and transparent. So what you've got ahead is already programmed. The issue is to have a clear program of what you're doing, whether it's on your job, what the relationship you have with the external auditor or even the internal audit program. It must be transparent and preferably vested in terms of your program or the internal audit program in your strategic and operating risks. That's the most important thing the group does. Then issues that you're working through, nobody's surprised about. Nobody's surprised to hear someone knocking and wanting some information about it. The CEO is a bigger question in a way because they might come to the room, but they're not in the room of the audit committee the whole time. They will be a bit insecure about what you're doing and what it means for them, as CEOs often are, because it's the job that never sleeps. So that's where the skill of the audit chair is really after the committee to raise, to basically talk to the CEO and say, you'll see there were three big issues today that we're working on that you'll hear about. Here's what they are and here's what's happening or how we're trying to fix them. So that importance of establishing a positive relationship with the CEO by doing and even explicitly acknowledging this is what this committee is doing to help you do your job and ensure that the platform under you in doing your job is stable, not volatile. But that's a big job of the audit chair, to get that strong relationship with the CEO that indicates that you're helping them, but also if you're seeing things that don't look right, you've got to share that in the conversation too, but also what you're doing about it. You're there with an autonomy to basically encourage some changes and say, well, here's a problem I'm seeing, and frankly, I think we need to fix it. Here's what we can do. Here's what you need to do. If you don't rectify it, it is going to become ultimately a problem for you in your role. So you do it in a way which is not threatening, not intended to be threatening, but saying, we need your support for this, but it's actually ultimately there to try and help you. So I think my suggestion is to work with those two approaches.
Hi Peter, Patrick Hall. I'm chair of a local government audit and risk committee.
Patrick?
Just in regards to the agenda setting for audit and risk committee meetings, how involved should a chair be in relation to the setting of the agenda or input prior to the meeting? Obviously at the local government level, our governance teams generally will present an agenda that's been put together by the administration and even as much as input into the following year's audit program, the program of audits for the next coming year. How much involvement should the chair and the committee have in the finalisation of that audit program?
Huge. I mean, you mentioned two things there. I think the program is more important than the agenda. If you set the annual program, or sometimes you might set a 3-year program, but I would put a lot of effort into the program because there are compliance obligations or there are controls and policies that need to be reviewed. So you need to set the frequency and expectation around that into the year ahead specifically, not just a little block, but some specific things that you want done that you know need to get done over the next year or 3 years to make you comfortable about your job. The more, without being extensively detailed on it, the more effective you are at that, the less of an issue the agendas are, because the agendas then are basically reports on that program or covering matters arising. And I find, as a chair, I always get the secretariat, whoever it is, to send me the agenda. But with that earlier heavy work on the program, it doesn't take very long, because what's there is known to them. It needs to be on this meeting, and we follow a practice of the boilerplate: matters for decision, matters for information, matters for discussion, and then it just assembles in. That then, as chair, from either discussions you've had with the CEO or other things that should be going on, you add them in. But that's usually fine tuning. It shouldn't be, redrafting what management sent to you. But you've got to enable your own efficiency there by having a really strong program.
Hi, Peter. Excellent presentation. Thank you. Stephen Langsford, I chair the Audit and Risk Committee of Racing and Wagering. I was just often members of a Audit and Risk Committee are composed of members of the board. I was just interested in on your view regarding independent members of a ARC.
Yeah. Look, I am one, so I value them. No, but with Carolyn's Audit and Risk Committee, I think the nature of it is that, as well as having an independent chair, which Carolyn wanted anyway, some of the later discussion we had in my first year is, in terms of having a different and independent voice, we needed another member. So I like 2 independent members, one of which is chair. I think if you get more than that, you're starting to establish a bit of a divide with the management there. That they feel a bit outgunned. This is speaking frankly. If you've got just 1 or 2 independent members, they're seen prospectively, before you really know them, as catalytic, someone they're going to help you. But the majority of people, either the boardroom or, in the case of Carolyn, members of her senior executive team, they're very important, because we are the part-timers, the casual workers coming in once a quarter, a few telephone calls in between. It's not a lot of time to influence it. So that's why when you look around the audit and risk membership from the organisation, you want the people with the capacity to affect the actions where you expect they're going to be, like the CFO or the head of the main service delivery area, which has got bigger risks in it. So picking that group from the executive is equally important to having another independent member. But with Carolyn's committee, I value that, because the complexity in managing this committee, I have a person sitting there who's very good, Trish Ridsdale, who's well known in corporate governance, who's just looking at the big pictures and asking the questions off the wall, which are always good, but to some extent it means I have to worry less about it. So if you're facing that situation, grab somebody in. But I think you always need somebody independent, because psychologically, if it's just a subset of management, it's too much exposed to internal groupthink and ho-hum, we've got to do this. You need someone that's a bit of a refreshing change, not a cold shower necessarily, but someone that comes in with an outside perspective and think, okay, guys, let's G up here. This is the real job. Not sure what you were doing, but this is the real job. Let's get on with that. 1 or 2 independent members can help with that for sure. There was another lurking hand, but yes, there we go.
Thank you, Peter, for an excellent presentation. I'm Vivian McCarthy, President of the local government in Shire of Donnybrook, Balingup. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on the presence of public galleries in Audit and Risk Committee meetings and the suggestion of live streaming them.
A suggestion of?
Live streaming them.
Oh, yes, okay. Look, this is probably where some of the biases are going to come out. In any job, I mean, boards have a private session for good reason. There are things they need to talk about related to the risks facing the organisation and the performance of the CEO. So all boards need a private session. Board, audit and risk committees will need a private session. So if you're going to live stream or have public participation in the committee, that's fine. But ultimately, you have to ensure that the environment for that committee is appropriate for its decision making. That there might be some things that the audit committee needs to discuss that are quite controversial, where you have a pre-meeting You might have a public meeting, but you have a pre-meeting. Let's thrash this around. Where are people on this? Because public meetings means media present or social media activists present. And they love, classic journalism 101 is to find out what the issue is and find the contrasting views and write up the story. So sometimes, particularly in local government, you need that. You want active debate on the contestable propositions, but you also have to do your job. You're not marketing and communications, you're an audit and risk committee, and you have real duty under legislation and financial governance of the organisation to make sure you're dealing with the issues that matter. But thinking of the audit and risk committees that I'm on, I don't think it wouldn't matter for a lot of it. It can be publicly provided, and that's more the expectation these days. But if you do, then you've got to provide for some private discussion amongst the committee members to not to get groupthink, but to really say, where do we define ourselves at the extremes of whatever this issue is? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks very much, Carol.
So much. I think you can see why I value Peter chairing my audit committee just so much. Peter, your insight and often I do use you as a sounding board on things, and as the CEO, and as you say, I've got senior members of my office exec team and next level senior leaders who want to be on the audit committee with you and Trish because they learn from you, and also they think at a whole of organisation level. For me, those catch-ups we have either after the meeting or in between, if something's rumbling around for me, something that I'm sort of observing in the organisation, I really value your advice as a sounding board. Because from what you're seeing in the papers and the discussions and the testing of my team, it really is incredibly beneficial. And I know, my guys seem to really like going off to Peter's audit committee meetings. So that's a good sign too, that it feels constructive. It feels, as you said in opening, they're inspired by it. Are you getting what you... Thank you. Thank you. But look, in terms of the tough stuff, I will remember that, just the next progressive steps, and, it will surely end. That will become my mantra in the back of my head when there is some tough stuff going on. But look, let me give you a bit of an update about what's going on around the sector. So, in the room, we have state and local government sector reps. And look, those of you who've travelled from near and far, once again, I really am very grateful for your commitment to good public governance, because as we know, it provides our standard of living. And it's an amazing standard of living, here in Western Australia. The sector at the moment, in Western Australia, I don't need to tell any one of you about how tight the labour market is. The skills shortage is real. I know you're all feeling it in your organisations, that you either get a new responsibility or you have a regretted departure, and trying to find the right person to fill that role and to jump in at the pace that is needed, the relentless pace, is tough. So I know you're stretched. You know that we are somewhat stretched in our ability to recruit professional auditors and meet the growing demands of our audit work program, which is only going to get bigger as sustainability reporting and things come in future. Glad to say it's not quite here yet. But look, in the state sector, although idealistically we would like it not to have an impact on the rhythm of public administration, you will be aware it's an election year. And that means that the entities whose audit committees you serve on are under pressure. There's just an increased rate of activity that is going on in each of those organisations. Demands that are the focus of the senior leadership in those organisations. So when we go into audit, I'm asking my guys to be mindful of that. Request information once, use it often. Make sure that we're as efficient as we can be, because we do understand that there is pressure around the sector. But look, in terms of our findings from the 2023 audit season, the overarching trend is positive. I'm really pleased to say, we kept on having record numbers of audit qualifications year on year, reaching new records, and it's a really dubious honour. So really nice to see that tick down slightly in the 23 year. It's still too high, the number of audit qualifications, particularly around controls, information systems and financial management controls. And too many entities continue to have repeat audit qualifications. But look, at least the trend is moving in the right direction. I will just call out something that we didn't ever want to do, and as far as I know, and maybe Don Cunningham in the room here will correct me, or Colin, my fine predecessor, Deep heard. We issued an adverse opinion on controls for the Department of Primary Industries and Regional Development last year. And that's significantly more qualified than significantly more serious than a qualified opinion on controls, because once you got to 5 qualifications on 5 different control matters, we realised that controls could not be relied upon. They were not sufficiently adequate, and we issued an adverse opinion. And, that's something you never want to see in an entity of any size, particularly a sizeable entity, a Department of State. So, that was really serious. I hope that's the absolute low point. And I understand Deepherd is doing some great work. We'll take some credit there in that a highly valued member of our audit team is now there helping them fix some things. But no, the DG and the seriousness with which that is being taken is commendable. Once the senior leadership in the sector is aware of an issue, I'm really pleased that they're engaging with it. There's also some really important work that if you haven't heard about yet, make sure you ask about it, stay aware of it from your CFOs and CEOs. The Department of Treasury and the Public Sector Commission is doing a financial management capability continuous improvement project. It was just signed off by the Treasurer last month. Treasurer's instructions are going from 63 to 10. We're moving from principles to rules-based, not for this coming financial year, but the year after. This is going to require a big uplift in capability, because you need to know the principles and you need to exercise judgment. And you need to be able to document the basis for those judgments. So that means that, accounting policy judgments, which we talk to you about through the audit process all the time, why are you, writing assets off over this period, this valuation methodology, what assumptions have you made? That stuff needs to be documented more than ever. So it's actually a really positive trend. The PSC is rolling out leadership capability uplift across the state sector, and it's focusing first, I'm really pleased to say, on financial management. And so we're really pleased that the communication we've been doing around the uplift required in the sector has been sort of taken by the horns, by the central agencies, and there's some really, really good materials that's coming out of the PSC in coming years, and our office and many of your entities will have been involved in the process for focusing and prioritising the work there and testing some of the early stuff. So really do ask your finance teams about that. Local government, we're tabling our audit results report from the 23 season in the next week or two. And look, the numbers are looking a bit similar to last year, a few more significant issues but fewer management issues overall. And look, really pleased that the big satisfaction there is that instead of having, I think it was 61% of audits completed by Christmas, by the due date in 2022, which was just too low. It was ridiculously low. We had 90% completed by Christmas for the 23 season. And that's actually, satisfying all round, because we can all move on. And that's reflected in the survey results, thankfully, which I'll get to shortly. But, everyone values an efficient and timely compliance exercise, so you can look to the main game of actually performance and delivery for your communities. Main things that we still keep us awake at night are information system controls, cybersecurity in particular. So look, the result that Cam and his team put out around local government information system controls, please have a look at that in the local government sector. We are seeing more entities in our capability maturity assessments reach the benchmark, but again, that cyber security and in particular and HR security, we're needing to see better improvements there. So, way forward. You may have heard us talk in the last couple of years, 18 months in particular, about our hard line approach. Now, what that means is that if you're not ready, we're going to issue an opinion. We'll give you a chance to provide the information, to correct the statements, but we're not going to give endless amounts of time to wait for valuations if they haven't been received, to wait for your staff to return from leave if you know they haven't engaged with the audit process. We're going to issue opinions as they are. That gives us all a truer reflection of your entity and the sector. And as I say, it allows us to move forward, just move on. And, you know, as we've seen with the City of Nedland's disclaimer in recent times, you know, that actually does lead to action, hopefully, there. So, you know, same with DPIRD. It means that everyone in the organisation knows there's a significant problem there, and we know that, you know, financial management, poor financial management, you can't get anything done in the public sector without good financial management. That's sort of the starting point for everything. But poor financial management can be a sign of dysfunction. And so addressing that and having clarity of thought, clarity of focus and seeing uplift there, the success of achievement can actually be really satisfying once the problem is discerned and communicated. So we're going to continue that hardline approach. And look, we've received fantastic feedback in response to it. I think the sector really has, you know, in a way we're just doing what auditors should do. We just stepped into being too helpful. You know, we were too helpful with the new local government sector, and you know where the state sector was struggling with machinery of government changes, big amalgamations, and things. We really were trying to help them get over the line. And I think there's also been a bit of a cost shift where finance teams have in agencies, and you know over the last 6 or 7 years, there's been finance functions that have had no additional resourcing, and the agency has gone from, you know, 50 million to 500 million, for example. And so that finance team is stretched, and if you don't have the corporate knowledge of how the pieces get held together, that can lead to gaps. It impairs the audit preparedness, the quality of the statements, and therefore impedes the smoothness and efficiency of the audit process. So in response, we've issued, you know, better practice guides. If you're not using them, if your CFOs are not using them, please make sure they do. And there's a really handy checklist in the Audit Committee Better Practice Guide, in the Financial Statement Better Practice Guide, to help identify what the role of the Audit Committee is in these processes. So for planning ahead, but also you know, where your check-in points are and what you should be seeing from your CFO. So really encourage your CFOs to review our Better Practice Guides, and, you know, get them to perform those checks on audit readiness before the audit starts. Audit methodology. Now, this is an internal issue, but hopefully you'll see efficiencies. So our really old clunky cost nothing to maintain because it came out of the Queensland Audit Office audit tool and methodology is finally retiring or has been retired, and we're rolling out a new audit tool and revamped methodology. Our guys have been trained in it. There's been a huge amount of training in it, and so many challenges in terms of learning new tools and the frustrations that come with learning new technology, but we really are focused on the efficiencies that will come from that. So obviously delivering quality audits, but more efficiently, and hopefully that will impact on fees, which I'll get to shortly. But look, if I can just ask you two things. Please focus on audit readiness, and it makes our relationship so much smoother. We can all focus on the exciting bits of good public governance, and also, you know, making sure those issues that have been identified in audits aren't outstanding the following year. Because, you know, the issues that lag, whether they be financial control weaknesses or information system control weaknesses, there is a real risk of something going wrong, even fraud. And, I know that you guys don't want the headaches of that, but it also costs more, as I say, for delivering your audits when things aren't smooth. So look, I want to thank you all, and I'm sure all of those in the room did complete the Audit Committee Chair survey. We had a 60% response rate. Obviously, really, that's great feedback in terms of numbers. It was split about half-half between state and local government. Obviously, we really welcome your feedback. It's a really valuable tool for us in terms of our continuous improvement and knowing what the issues are for you so that we can better service you. Really pleased that about 90% of you agree that we provide valuable assurance. Integrity and credibility is evident, and obviously that we're independent. So, look, in terms of previous surveys, I'm pleased that there's a more favourable perception there, and that you see that we're adding value. But what can we do better? And this is really where we focus. And as Peter was talking about the Audit Committee sort of evaluations, it's always the goal is in what can be done better. And so, look, as I've already mentioned today, improving timeliness is really important for us, and we hear it. It's important for you. I'm glad we're all on the same page as that. So being audit ready and making sure that the timeframes we agree with you in the schedule can be met is really valuable for both of us. It ensures there's no surprises, and it ensures that we're not pulling out from the audit, with frustration or a less quality set of statements than either of us would like. Better communications and engagement. Laura, who was holding the mic previously, told me with great excitement yesterday that she went to her first, Laura is in the communications team, went to her first financial audit entry meeting yesterday or the day before. And I asked her how that went, and she said she loved it. That was a State Department audit entry lead. And I said, how were you introduced? She said, I told the CFO that I was there to, basically observe the meeting so that we could work out how best to communicate with you, with entities in written and verbal form. And that's about us making sure that, we're clear in our communication, the level of detail that we provide actually is useful to you. It helps you engage with what the issues are, or helps you understand the bits that we don't see they're a problem, and it gives you that comfort, that assurance that you value, and really focusing on what improvements could be made to financial management and the audit process. So, Laura, thank you for your enthusiasm in the engaging in financial audit processes, and I know the teams value having you around. In terms of the Audit Committee meetings, thanks for your feedback that you value our attendance. We love attending, we love being invited, and obviously it's incredibly valuable for us to do so. We get to as many as we can and as our schedules permit. So please keep inviting us. And, we also, if you're not invited to audit entry and exit meetings, please speak to your DG or your CEO, because our expectation is that as Audit Committee Chair, you're invited to those meetings. You're very, very welcome from our perspective and very valued at those meetings. In terms of our role and clarity around the independence of our role, look, it's really nice to hear that you'd like us to do more with your teams and be involved in providing support and guidance, and that you value the better practice guides. We're careful not to step into the space of central agencies like Department of Treasury or the Department of Local Government for the LG sector. Obviously, our independence is really important. Otherwise it's a consulting report, not an audit report. And so, look, please, we'll keep navigating and making sure that, we provide you with the support and advice that we can in a general sense. But also we want to make sure that Treasury and Department of Local Government maintain their roles in that space in supporting as central agencies. And so thanks for your feedback in the survey on that, because that helps us speak with both of those entities as well. Fees. again, I'm glad to hear that you care about public money and how it's spent, because we do too, and we don't like seeing your audit fees go up, because audit is not an end in itself. It is part of the trust process in public administration and in our system of governance. But fees are affected by two things. Obviously, there's been price inflation, and also it's affected by hours, the number of hours to get your audit done. And so, if there's good quality financial statements and information to support and smooth processes, then the audit process can be very efficient. And so, that's what we ask you to strive for, and what we would like to, see every time we turn up to an entity. And so, that streamlined reporting and audit process will see fees go down. If your fees go down, if my whole financial audit fee bucket goes down, that's a very good thing. And obviously we need to get more efficient on our corporate side, because there's not the overhead bit there as well. So make sure that you give us that feedback, because we really do value it. We want to be as efficient as we can and give you great service. So the fact you're all here today means that you care, as I said. I'd like to open it to any questions. That's all I have to say, but really I welcome your questions about anything. And we've got some of our senior people here in the room, from forensic, from financial audit, IS audit, and Deputy Auditor General Sandra there. So please, if I can't answer anything or there's someone closer to it that might be able to give you a bit more information, I welcome that. So just before we go to refreshments, if you're not too keen to get there. Patrick.
Jump in before anyone else does. Just a couple of things quickly. The hardline approach. I've been on our risk and audit committee for 10 years, and I think it's great. I appreciate it, and you've got my full support. So at local government land, sometimes we do need a bit of a push along. Things like audit recommendations, I think, could be dealt with far more efficiently, and they would be bobbling away in the water if we didn't push them along. So I think that audit preparation is really important. So just a vote of confidence for that. And I like the fact the OAG is having strong opinions in relation to all manner of things. And I know the OAG was criticised, not really criticised, but the Cook government had some issues in relation to the COVID advertising of that. I enjoy the fact that the OAG is coming out with strong opinions without fear or favour, and I just wanted to put that on the public record. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It gives great confidence to our guys who, sometimes auditing is not the easiest, but I recognise that each of the roles that you're in, both the audit committee chair hat, but also the other jobs that you have, often you're the sort of people who run towards the fire rather than away from it, as I know someone once said to you, Peter, and it is that it will end. So we just doing our job is really what that's about. But thank you for that confidence and support.
Councillor Peter McCleary from the Shire of Capel. I'm new to the position of Audit Chair, and I heard a couple of questions earlier. I'm really seeking some advice and learning curves on where to go to improve the role that I have.
I might hand you back to Peter. Look, I'm happy for you to jump into that one, Peter. It's why don't you come up to the mic so those online can hear it, because they heard Peter's question.
One word to start, here. I mean, the value of this group isn't so much what happens here, it's what happens out there. So you should be collecting business cards and talking to people about common issues they have, because, just as I tried to say in that presentation, the what of the audit committee is pretty straightforward. You can find it in a dozen places. Making it work is a function of experience and trying different things out, and some of the tips I gave there, you should think about trying. But the value of this group is as much about the informal connections you make and people you can ring up if you've got something that you feel you want to talk to with a trusted colleague, because there's a huge amount of experience in this room. But there aren't many courses on it though. That's the problem.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Peter. Look, asking our guys, and as Peter Wilson said earlier, the ability to have private, those in-camera sessions as a committee or with management, you're able to do that with our auditors as well. In fact, that's good practice for the audit committee to have in-camera sessions with the auditors and just say, how's it going? How do you see our organisation? Was the finance team responsive? And let them talk directly to you without management present, particularly if you feel that with management present, they might be being overly diplomatic or skirting around an issue and there might be something there. Use your gut, ask to meet with them privately. That's good practice.
I'm Jane Cutler. I'm not here in the capacity of an audit committee on local government, but I'm a councillor at the town of Cambridge. Our audit committee actually has some independent members, and one of the independent members is actually the chair, as well as local government elected members. So we use the community through an EOI process to input expertise and experience into the audit committee, and I think that's very valuable. And having the independent as chair, and I independently chair state government entities, audit committees, I think it's good practice for local government. The second comment I would make is I'm not sure what's driving an earlier question around making local government audit committees public. That would seem to be double dipping, since the report already goes to the ordinary council meeting. The community have an opportunity to ask questions on the report at that meeting. So it would be two bites of the cherry and add administrative burden in terms of live streaming and so on. So not question, but just some statements.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Jane. We're obviously very conscious that what goes public in terms of the information, our management letters, there are some issues that are too sensitive to be made public, and particularly around information system or cyber control weaknesses. And so that's been a learning for us in the local government sector, the blanket tabling of OAG management letter findings. We don't want to be exposing entities to risk by reporting them. And so making sure that we are not giving all the detail, and that's something that Cam and his team do well, but it's also something for the local government to review and make sure, because it's, transparency is so important in our system of government, trust in government and accountability, but we don't want to be, exposing any entity to harm as a result, particularly in the cyberspace. Natasha, did you have a question online?
I do. Should the Local Government Audit Committee be concerned with the Work Health and Safety Act in terms of risk to elected members? According to the Workplace Commissioner, the local government corporate body is the responsible person undertaking a business or undertaking, which means a big responsibility, including severe penalties for contravening the WHS Act.
I suspect there's people in the room who know more about the WHS Act than I do, and so if you do, please put up your hand. But one thing I would say is the recent changes, my understanding of them, and we've obviously had this discussion around our executive leadership table, because obviously we're all responsible, and under the changes, for the new penalties are jail time. But my understanding is that, and really the main change is around, egregious negligence. So it's that we've had pretty good OH&S laws or work health safety laws in this country for a long time. The main change is the jail time, where it is proven that egregious negligence, what's the term? Someone will know the term closer than I, but that's how I think of it. Is that if you have taken absolutely no safety precautions, if you've got people working, in 40 knot winds on a 45-degree day at heights, and you've got no safety harness or scaffolding or anything, and you've ordered people to go there against the world, that's the kind of stuff that will get you jail time. I'm not downplaying it at all. Obviously, work health safety, you need a strong system, but that to me is my understanding of the change and how I've had it explained to me, that those changes were designed to really deter and fix and then penalise in the harshest way possible people who knowingly and actively expose their workers, and people coming into they're responsible. What is it? People carrying on a. Now you're testing me. What is it? People. Yeah. So those responsible, if they're coming onto your place and you've got, you're exposing people to harm in a really negligent way. So. In terms of the question, what's the risk to elected members? I'd say that making sure that there's nothing that fits that category, but the normal, and if uplift is required, diligence in those areas, there should be systems in place. We've had good OH&S or work health safety laws for a while now. But I will open that to anyone else who has a different or stronger view on the floor. Tash has another question from online.
Sure. Can you talk about your engagement with Treasury around future funding to ensure small state agencies are appropriately funded to address risks such as cyber?
I don't think that's a Dorothy Dixer because I don't think I'm representing Treasury. So the Office of Digital Government, and this started under Colin's term, the work of this office in terms of information systems audits really did lead to that government CIO role, which is now the Office of Digital Government within Premier and Cabinet. And the work that they have been doing is fantastic for the sector. It's really fantastic for our sector. And the CAM, do you want to come and speak to that? Because the dashboard and the monitoring that they do, I know we only have a couple of minutes, so actually we're over time, but it might be worth you, because you know probably the discernment, we're seeing it at a higher level through the Digital Capability Fund, but how much is going to smaller state entities from that question?
So a large amount of obviously money was set aside for cybersecurity and information security control problems. Entities can apply through a business case to access that funding. So it doesn't matter your size, small or large, you can access that funds. And now recently in the recent budget, there's also some money for local governments as well through digital government, but you had to apply for it.
Yeah, I think that was more for local government. It was for the tier 3 and 4 local governments, and it was a pilot, wasn't it? That they're trying.
They're trialling a pilot this year.
Yeah, which I think Wolga and LG Pro are quite excited about because they've been lobbying for that. But in terms of our work with Treasury on small, look, we don't get involved in the budget process for anyone. We're not advocates for your budget, although obviously the impact of our work in identifying problems in your entity can be very useful for getting leverage and getting action in terms of funding to fix those problems, but also those issues across the sector. And as I said, the findings that have led to the Treasury and PSC work around financial management capability uplift is a direct result of the work of this office. Another one, Tash?
Yes, this is probably more of a comment. It's concerning cybersecurity as well. It's clearly an increasing risk. However, we are still required to publish a monthly list of accounts for payments for public viewing. We see this as a greater risk to manage and believe they should only be made available to elected members. Yeah, there's been a fraud. I think it was Broome, wasn't it? Someone went through the payments listing and then issued invoices that looked very similar with their own bank account details, and they're not the only ones that I've heard of. And so I really think there's that balance, and who needs to know the information and for what purpose, and, are there more effective accountability mechanisms, proper scrutiny at the supervision and sign-off level. We're about to table a report on local government purchasing cards, so store cards and credit cards, and I don't think it will surprise anyone that we found that review of transactions of card holders in a timely way, where there's meaningful review of the appropriateness of expenditure, the reasonableness of it, and within delegation, could be improved. I reckon it's refreshment time. I reckon we can all have some further discussions over a bite to eat and without the microphones. But thank you once again for all attending. Thank you to those online who attended. Really appreciate your support and engagement in the work of the office. And thank you once again to Peter. Really appreciated your time and insight. So thank you.